I walked into my parents' engagement party drenched in rain because my daughter's specialist had just given me less than 24 hours to lock in her treatment slot. I was not asking for a handout. My mother did not look past my wet coat and my father checked his watch. Then my brothers smiled and said they had already spent the money. 3 years later, those same people sat across from me and whispered that I was their only hope. My name is Brooklyn Harrison, and I stood on the front porch of my childhood home, looking like a drowning victim who had washed up at a black tie gala. The rain in Charleston does not just fall, it hammers against the earth with a humid and suffocating weight. I was drenched to the bone. My trench coat was heavy with water and my hair was plastered to my skull. Inside the house, the warm glow of crystal chandeliers spilled out onto the wet pavement. I could hear the murmur of polite laughter and the clinking of expensive glass. It was the sound of a world where nothing bad ever happened. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. The air conditioning hit me like a physical slap. The foyer was crowded with the elite of the city. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in silk gowns turned to look at me. The music, a soft jazz quartet playing in the corner, seemed to falter for a second before resuming. I saw the butler's eyes widen as he took in the puddle forming around my boots on the marble floor. I did not care. Shame is a luxury for people who have time. I scanned the room and found them, Raymond and Celeste. My parents were holding court near the grand staircase. My mother looked immaculate in silver satin, and my father was laughing at something a senator was whispering in his ear. They looked perfect. They looked like people who had never known a single day of desperation in their lives. I walked straight toward them. I did not stop to greet the neighbors I had known since kindergarten. I did not apologize when my wet sleeve brushed against a woman's bare shoulder. I reached my parents and grabbed my father's arm. He turned, his smile freezing in place when he saw me. "Brooklyn." His voice was a low warning. "You are dripping on the floor. We need to talk. Now." My voice was hoarse. I sounded feral. My mother stepped in, her smile tight and strained. "Not now, darling. The toasts are about to start." "Why are you wet? Where is your dress?" "I am not here for the party." I pulled them toward the library. I did not give them a choice. I think the sheer force of my panic startled them into compliance because they followed me into the study and I shut the heavy double doors, cutting off the music and the laughter. The silence in the room was deafening. I turned to face them. I did not have time to ease into this. Harlow relapsed. My mother sighed, smoothing the front of her gown. "Oh, Brooklyn, I thought she was doing better. That new medication, it stopped working. The cancer is aggressive. Her specialist called me 2 hours ago. There is a slot open for CAR-T therapy at the center in Atlanta. It is her last chance." Mom, her only chance. But because of the manufacturing costs and the lab time, they require a deposit up front before they will even admit her. "How much?" my father asked. He did not sound concerned. He sounded like he was asking the price of a transmission repair. $95,000. The number hung in the air between us. My father blinked. My mother let out a small, sharp breath. "I need it by tomorrow afternoon," I said, the words tumbling out of me. "If I do not wire the funds by 2 o'clock, they give the slot to the next child on the waiting list." My father walked over to his desk and sat down. He picked up a crystal tumbler and looked at the amber liquid inside. "Brooklyn, that is a significant amount of cash on short notice. Where is your insurance? Where is that husband of yours and his savings? We are in the middle of a transition." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, the humiliation burning my throat. My consulting firm had a brutal quarter. Clients pulled back. We switched providers to save money, and the new policy has a 60-day gap for pre-existing condition escalation. We are fighting it, but the approval board will not meet for another week. Harlow does not have a week, so you are asking us to clean up your mess. My mother's voice was icy. "You know how we feel about financial irresponsibility. Brooklyn, we told you that leaving the corporate track for independent consulting was a risk. You should have planned better." "Planned better?" I stared at her. My daughter's immune system is failing. How exactly do you plan for a relapse that happens overnight? I am not asking for a gift. I am asking for a loan. I will sign whatever you want. I will sell the house. I just need the cash now. My father shook his head. It is not that simple. Liquidating that kind of capital triggers tax events. It disrupts the portfolio. Disrupts the portfolio? I felt my hands shaking. I stepped closer to the desk. Dad, we are talking about your granddaughter. We are talking about her life. The library door opened. I turned to see my brother, Grant, standing there. He looked polished and handsome, the golden boy of the family. His fiancée, Sloane, stood just behind him, looking bored and expensive. I knew I heard shouting. Grant stepped into the room, adjusting his cufflinks. You are making a scene. Brooklyn, people are asking where Mom and Dad went. This is our engagement party, remember? Or did you decide that you needed to be the center of attention again? I ignored him. I looked at my father. Please, I know you have it. I know you have the liquidity. We do not. My father said it calmly. He did not even look up from his drink. I froze. What? We do not have $95,000 available to give you. Brooklyn. I looked around the room. I looked at the first edition books, the Persian rugs, the heavy velvet drapes. You are lying. This party alone costs more than that. That is exactly the point. My father stood up. He walked over to Grant and placed a hand on his shoulder. We have just finalized the contracts for Grant and Sloane's wedding, the venue in Lake Como, the planners, the travel for the bridal party, the honeymoon suite. Grant smiled, a small, smug curve of his lips. It is going to be the event of the decade. Brooke, we wired the payments this morning. My father continued. $250,000. It is non-refundable. The accounts are tapped for the quarter until the dividends clear in 3 months. The room seemed to tilt. $250,000. They had spent $250,000 on a wedding, on a party, on flowers and napkins and champagne. And they had done it while knowing Harlow was sick. You can't pull some of it back? I whispered. Even half? I can beg the hospital to take a partial payment. My mother scoffed. It is non-refundable. Brooklyn, do you want Grant to lose his deposit? Do you want to ruin his special time because you could not manage your own household? This is a once-in-a-lifetime season for your brother. We are not going to tarnish it with your drama. Drama. My daughter dying was drama. Their party was a season. I looked at Grant. He was checking his reflection in the glass of the bookcase. He did not care. He actually did not care. I looked at my parents. They were not confused. They were not misunderstood. They had made a choice. They had looked at a spreadsheet and decided that a wedding in Italy was worth more than the breath in my daughter's lungs. The desperation that had been clawing at my chest for the last 2 hours suddenly vanished. It was replaced by something cold, something hard and heavy like a stone settling in my gut. I reached down to my left wrist. I was wearing a delicate silver bracelet with sapphires. It was a family heirloom. My mother had given it to me on my 30th birthday, telling me that one day, if I kept my nose clean and my reputation spotless, I would inherit the rest of the set. It was the leash she used to keep me in line, the promise of future affection in exchange for present obedience. I unclasped the latch. The metal felt cold against my skin. I walked over to my mother. She flinched, as if she thought I might strike her. I took her hand and dropped the bracelet into her palm. Keep it, Brooklyn. Do not be childish. She hissed. I am not being childish. I am being clear. I looked her in the eye. I will never earn love with obedience again. I turned my back on them. I did not wait for their response. I did not wait for my father to bluster or for Grant to make another snide comment about my wet clothes. I walked out of the library. I walked back through the foyer. The party was in full swing now. A waiter offered me a glass of champagne. I walked past him without breaking stride. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped back out into the night. The rain was still falling. It was torrential now, a sheet of gray water that obscured the streetlights. I stood on the bottom step of the porch and pulled out my phone. My hands were wet and trembling, but I typed the message, I sent it to Evan. No help. But Harlow will live, even if it costs me everything. I put the phone in my pocket and walked into the dark. I had less than 24 hours to build a miracle. The drive home from my parents' house was a blur of wiper blades and red taillights. I did not cry. Crying takes energy, and I had none to spare. I had less than 24 hours to find $95,000. The clock in the dashboard seemed to mock me, ticking away seconds I could not afford to lose. When I walked through our front door, Evan was already at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Harlow was staying at her friend's house for a sleepover. A small mercy intended to shield her from the storm we knew was coming. Evan looked up as I entered. He did not ask how it went. He saw the wet coat, the ruined hair, and the hollow look in my eyes. He knew. He stood up and pulled a notepad toward him. Okay, plan B. We spent the next 6 hours in a hell made of hold music and automated rejection emails. I called every bank within a 50-mile radius. I called credit unions where I had held accounts since college. I applied for personal loans with predatory interest rates that would have crippled us for a decade. It did not matter. The answer was always the same. We are sorry, but your current debt-to-income ratio does not meet our lending criteria. We are sorry, but due to your recent employment transition, we require 2 years of tax returns. We are sorry. We are sorry. We are sorry. Every rejection felt like a door slamming in my face. The medical lenders were the worst. They spoke with soft, practiced empathy while denying the application. They were sorry about my daughter's situation. They said, but policy was policy. At midnight, Evan stood up. He walked to the garage without saying a word. I heard the rumble of an engine, low and throaty, and then silence. When he came back inside 20 minutes later, he placed a thick envelope of cash and a cashier's check on the table. I sold the bike, he said. I looked at him. That motorcycle was a 1972 restoration he had spent 4 years rebuilding. It was his therapy. It was the only thing he owned that was just for him. Evan, I whispered. He did not look at me. He just wrote a figure on the legal pad. $7,000. The guy down the street has been eyeing it for months. I woke him up and told him if he had cash, it was his. He sat down and opened his laptop. I also liquidated the Roth IRA. The penalty is steep, nearly 40% because of the early withdrawal and the tax hit. But the transfer should clear by morning. That gives us another $12,000, $19,000. We were not even close. I felt a wave of nausea. I opened my business banking portal. I had 3 outstanding invoices from clients who were notoriously slow payers. I applied for an emergency bridge loan using the invoices as collateral. It was a common practice for small businesses. It should have been easy. The screen refreshed. Denied. Revenue consistency insufficient. I closed the laptop and put my head in my hands. The room was spinning. We were $76,000 short. The hospital admission deadline was 2 o'clock the next day. If we missed it, the slot went to another child. Manufacturing the T-cells took weeks. Harlow did not have weeks. I started walking around the house at 2 a.m. I was manic. I looked at the television. $200, maybe. The couch, $500. I pulled clothes out of the closet. I started listing things on a marketplace app. Snapping photos with trembling hands. Designer purses I had bought in my corporate life. A lamp. A rug. I was pricing a winter coat for $50 when I stopped. I was standing in front of the refrigerator. There was a school photo of Harlow from last year. She was smiling, missing a front tooth, her hair messy from recess. She looked so alive. She looked invincible. I looked at the pile of clothes on the floor. I was trying to hold back a tsunami with a paper cup. Selling a used coat for $50 was not a plan. It was a delusion. The shame that had been choking me all night evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard rage settled in my chest. My parents had spent $250,000 on flowers and linens while I was calculating the resale value of my shoes to keep my daughter alive. The injustice of it tasted like copper in my mouth. I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the sun come up. The gray light filtered through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The world was waking up. People were making coffee. People were going to work, and I was sitting in the wreckage of my life, waiting to tell my husband that we had failed. At 7 o'clock, a truck pulled into the driveway. It was an old Ford, rusted around the wheel wells. I watched through the window as Evan's parents, Wade and Jolene, climbed out. They looked exhausted. Wade was wearing his work boots and a flannel shirt. Jolene was carrying a plastic grocery bag. They did not knock. They just walked in. The smell of biscuits and sausage filled the kitchen, a scent of normalcy that felt jarringly out of place. "Morning," Wade said. He placed a thermos of coffee on the table. "You two look like hell." Evan rubbed his face. "Mom, Dad, we are working on it. We are just a little short, we know," Jolene said. She started unpacking the breakfast. She moved with efficient, quiet energy. She did not hug me. She did not offer platitudes. She just put a biscuit on a plate and set it in front of me. "Eat. You need strength." Wade pulled a chair out and sat opposite me. He reached into his flannel pocket and pulled out a folded check. He slid it across the table. "I sold the boat," he said. I stared at the check. The boat was a 20-foot fishing vessel he had named the Jolene. He had spent his entire life working in a factory, saving dollar by dollar to buy that boat for his retirement. He had only had it in the water twice. "Wade," I said, my voice cracking, "you cannot do that. That is your dream." Wade shrugged. He took a sip of coffee. "Dreams are for people who have time. Brooklyn. Besides, I never liked the maintenance. Too much hassle." He was lying. I knew he was lying. He loved that boat more than anything except his family. Jolene sat down next to him. She placed a second check on top of the first. "This is from my life insurance policy," she said softly. "Jolene." "No," Evan said, standing up. "That is for your care later. You have been paying into that for 20 years. It is dead money," she said firmly. She looked at me, her eyes clear and dry. "It pays out when I am gone. What good is money when I am dead if my grandbaby is not here to grow up?" I cashed it out. The surrender value is not what the face value was, but it is liquid. I looked at the numbers: Wade's boat, Jolene's death benefit, Evan's bike. It was enough. It was exactly enough to cover the deposit with a few $100s to spare. I looked at the checks on the wooden table. They were wrinkled. They were stained with the sweat and labor of people who had worked hard for every single cent. There was no marble here. There were no chandeliers. There was just a rusted truck in the driveway and a grocery bag of biscuits and 4 people sitting in a kitchen. I broke. I did not weep gracefully. I put my head on the table and sobbed until my ribs ached. I cried because I was terrified. I cried because I was relieved, but mostly I cried because I finally understood what love was. Love was not a bracelet given as a reward for obedience. Love was not a wedding paid for with company funds. Love was a fisherman selling his boat without a second thought. Love was a grandmother trading her own end-of-life security for a child's beginning. Jolene put her hand on my back. She did not say anything. She just rubbed circles between my shoulder blades, her hand warm and rough. "We have to move," Evan said, his voice thick. "The wire cutoff is in 2 hours. We scrambled." The drive to the bank was tense, but it was a different kind of tension. It was the focus of soldiers on a mission. We stood at the teller window together. I watched the bank manager type in the routing numbers. I watched him verify the funds. I held my breath until he hit the enter key and a receipt printed out. "Transfer confirmed," he said. I collapsed against the counter. I pulled out my phone to text the specialist at the hospital. That was when the message came through. It was from my mother. I stared at the screen. I expected her to ask if we had found the money. I expected her to ask how Harlow was feeling. I expected, perhaps foolishly, a shred of humanity. The text read, "Please do not embarrass the family online. We have a reputation to maintain, and people are already talking about your outburst last night. Keep this private." I read it twice. I looked at Wade and Jolene, who were holding hands by the door. I looked at Evan, who had sold his joy to save our daughter. And then I looked at the words on the screen. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break. It was the quiet sound of a bridge burning. She was worried about her reputation. She was worried about embarrassment. I did not reply. I locked the screen and put the phone in my pocket. I would not embarrass them online. Not today. Today, I had a daughter to save. But I would remember this. I would remember exactly who showed up when the sky fell. And I would remember who worried about the weather. We walked out of the bank and into the sunlight. We had built a miracle in 48 hours. Now we just had to survive the cure. Crescent Ridge Children's Immunotherapy Unit in Atlanta does not smell like a hospital. It smells like aggressive cleanliness and old coffee. It smells like fear masked by lemon-scented floor wax. We walked through the sliding glass doors and the air pressure changed, sealing us inside a bubble where the only currency that mattered was white blood cell counts and manufacturing slots. The hallways were wide and brightly colored, painted with murals of jungle animals and space rockets, but the art could not hide the truth of the place. I saw it in the faces of the other parents we passed. They looked hollowed out. They walked with the specific, shuffling gait of people who had not slept in a bed for weeks. They carried travel mugs like talismans. When our eyes met, there was no polite nodding. There was just a flat, terrifying recognition. We were all members of the club. No one wants to join. I stood at the admissions desk. My hand shook as I held the pen to sign the consent forms. The stack of paper was thick. Liability waivers, financial responsibility agreements, treatment protocols, the administrator, a woman named Sheila with kind eyes and a tired smile, typed something into her computer. We received the wire transfer this morning. Mrs. Harrison, she said, the $95,000 is posted. We have cleared Harlow for the intake process. The lab is already prepping the cell collection kit. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I stood in the rain outside my parents' house. It was real. We had bought the seat on the lifeboat. Thank you, I whispered. We walked back to room 412. Harlow was sitting on the edge of the bed, her legs dangling in a hospital gown that was 2 sizes too big. She looked so small against the sterile white sheets. She was clutching her worn-out stuffed rabbit, a ragged thing she had named Mr. Buns when she was 3. When she saw us, she tried to smile. It was a brave, wobbly thing that broke my heart faster than her tears ever could. Hi, Mommy. Hi, Daddy. Hey, baby girl. Evan moved to the bedside instantly, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. Harlow looked at me. Her eyes were wide and serious. She had grown up too much in the last few months. Sickness steals childhood faster than time does. Mommy? She asked. Yeah. Sweetie? Did Grandma and Grandpa say yes? Did they give us the money? The room went still. Evan stiffened. I felt the weight of the lie sitting on my tongue. I could tell her the truth. I could tell her that her grandparents were currently planning a honeymoon in Italy while she sat in a hospital bed. I could plant that seed of bitterness right now and watch it grow. But looking at her pale face, I realized that the truth was a burden she was not strong enough to carry yet. I would not let their cruelty poison her spirit. I sat down next to her and took her hand. It felt fever hot. We took care of it, baby. I said softly, we have everything we need. Everyone just wants you to get better. That is the only thing that matters. She seemed to accept this. She nodded and leaned back against the pillows, closing her eyes. Okay, good. Outside the room, the Mercers had set up camp. Wade had claimed a chair in the waiting area at the end of the hall. He sat there like a sentry. He was not on his phone. He was not watching the television mounted on the wall. He was reading a 3-year-old fishing magazine, turning the pages with deliberate slowness. Every time a doctor or nurse walked into our room, his head would snap up, his eyes sharp and alert, before returning to his reading when he saw it was routine. He did not ask for updates every 5 minutes. He just stayed. His presence was a silent anchor in the chaos. Jolene was a different kind of force. She had turned the small family lounge into a command center. She had brought a cooler packed with meals. each one labeled with the day and contents in her neat cursive handwriting. She organized Evan's and my medications, vitamins, ibuprofen for the tension headaches, like a field medic. "You eat this now," she said, handing me a container of chicken salad. "You need protein. You cannot fight if you are fuel deprived." She did not offer empty hope. She did not say everything happens for a reason. She just made sure we were fed and watered so we could stand upright. It was practical love. It was the kind of love that sold a life insurance policy and then made a sandwich. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting an update from the billing department. It was a text from Grant. I stared at the screen. "Mom says stop making this about you. We are trying to finalize the catering numbers and she is upset because she thinks you are posting vague things on Facebook to make us look bad. Grow up. Brooklyn." I felt a flash of heat that had nothing to do with the room temperature. I had not posted anything. I had not spoken to a soul outside of this hospital and the bank. They were inventing a narrative where they were the victims of my crisis. They were creating a reality where my daughter's cancer was an inconvenience to their social calendar. I did not reply. I deleted the thread. I blocked his number for the next 24 hours. I could not afford the distraction. An hour later, another message came through. This one was from Celeste. It was an image file. I opened it. It was a photo of her and my father holding up a sample of table linens. The caption read, "Do you think the ivory or the champagne looks better with the hydrangeas? Also, did you get the money sorted?" Hope so. She did not ask about Harlow. She did not ask if we were in Atlanta. She asked about the color of napkins. I put the phone face down on the bedside table. I looked at my daughter, who was now hooked up to the apheresis machine. The blood was flowing out of her body, through the separator, and back in. It was a terrifying, miraculous loop. I watched the tubes turn red. I watched the monitors beep, and I made a vow. I looked at Evan, who was holding Harlow's other hand, his knuckles white. I looked at the door where Wade was keeping watch. Never again would I rely on them. Never again would my child's survival depend on the whims of people who cared more about appearances than human beings. I would dismantle my life and rebuild it from the ground up if I had to. I would work until my hands ached. I would scrub toilets. I would start a dozen companies. But I would never, ever ask Raymond and Celeste Harrison for a single cent as long as I lived. The door opened, and a nurse named Jordan came in to check the flow rate. He was young, efficient, and wore a kind smile that didn't reach his eyes, the look of someone who sees far too many sick children. He adjusted the line and checked the digital readout on the pump. "You guys are doing great," he said. "Her vitals are stable. The collection is going perfectly." "Thank you," Evan said. "We're just glad we got here in time." Jordan nodded. He paused for a second, eyes lingering on the chart. "You know, you're lucky." We looked at him. Lucky was not the word I would have used. "I mean with the timing," he clarified. "We had a family last week, same diagnosis, same window. They were waiting on a property sale to cover the manufacturing deposit. The buyer pulled out at the last second. By the time they got the funding together, about 48 hours later, the slot was gone, and the girl's T-cell count had dropped too low for collection." He checked the monitor one last time. "She didn't make it," he said softly. "It is a brutal business. Money moves slower than cancer. I am glad you guys had the funds ready." He walked out. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the rhythmic whirring of the machine. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Evan. He looked like he had been punched in the stomach. We had been 48 hours away. If Wade had hesitated to sell the boat, if Jolene had waited to call the insurance company, if Evan had tried to negotiate a better price for the motorcycle, we would be that family. We would be the ones being whispered about by nurses. Harlow would be the girl who didn't make it because the wire arrived on a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday. I reached out and touched Harlow's foot under the blanket. It was warm. She was here. She was alive, but outside in the world. My parents were debating ivory versus champagne, completely unaware that their hesitation had almost killed her. Or perhaps, more terrified. They were aware, and they simply did not care enough to stop it. I closed my eyes and listened to the machine. It sounded like a clock, and for the first time in 3 days, it was ticking in our favor. But I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones like frost, that I was done being a daughter. From this moment on, I was only a mother, and that was a very different thing. 6 months after the transfusion, the silence in my house was the heavy, suffocating kind that comes with survival. Harlow was alive. Her color had returned, a pale pink dusting on cheeks that had been translucent ghost white just seasons ago. She was still monitored, still fragile, and her immune system was a fortress with the gates left open. But she was breathing. The problem was that while my daughter's body was recovering, our financial life was in critical condition. I sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, surrounded by a mountain of paper. The medical bills had arrived in waves. First the small ones for lab work, then the terrifying ones for facility fees and specialist consults that the insurance company deemed out of network. We were drowning. The $95,000 had bought us the treatment, but the recovery was costing us everything else. The mortgage was 60 days overdue. The credit cards we had used to float groceries and gas were maxed out. I looked at a demand letter from a utility company and realized that panic was a luxury I could no longer afford. Panic was for people who had a safety net. I had a precipice. I needed to work, but my old consulting firm was dead. My previous clients had moved on during the months I spent living in a hospital chair. I could not just go back to writing generic marketing strategies or operational efficiency decks for retail chains. I needed something higher value. I needed to sell the only thing I had become a world-class expert in during the last half year, navigating the bureaucratic nightmare of healthcare vendor compliance and contract risk. The system that had almost crushed us was a machine built on friction. It thrived on lost paperwork, missed deadlines, and opaque vendor agreements. I knew exactly where the bodies were buried because I had been forced to dig them up with my bare hands. I spent the next 3 weeks pivoting my entire professional identity. I did not sleep. I audited every single expense in our household, cutting down to the bone, while simultaneously building a new business model. I created process maps that looked like war plans. I built case studies based on anonymized data from the billing errors I had fought for my own daughter. I developed a proprietary risk assessment framework that could identify vendor non-compliance in hospital supply chains. It was not magic. It was relentless. Grinding competence. I did not have luck. I had receipts. The biggest hurdle was time. I could not pitch to executives with a recovering child on my hip. This was where the quiet engine of my comeback stepped in. Every morning at 8 o'clock, Jolene walked through my front door. She did not ask if I needed help. She simply took over. She brought educational games for Harlow. She managed the nebulizer treatments and the strict dietary protocols. She created a protective bubble around my daughter so that I could put on a suit, cover the dark circles under my eyes with concealer, and walk out the door to wage war. I targeted Harborvale Health Systems. They were a regional group, large enough to have complex problems, but small enough that I could get to a decision-maker without fighting through 6 layers of administration. I spent a week stalking their CFO on professional networks, learning their pain points. The meeting was on a Tuesday. I walked into the conference room with a singular focus. I did not beg. I did not tell them my sob story. Corporate finance officers do not care about your sick child. They care about their bottom line. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. I have analyzed your public vendor filings and your quarterly waste reports. I said, my voice steady. You are bleeding approximately 12% on supply chain leakage and contract mismanagement in your outpatient facilities. I can stop that bleeding in 60 days. The CFO, a man named Caleb, who looked like he hadn't smiled since the 90s, raised an eyebrow. That is a bold claim for a one-woman shop. I am not a shop. I said, I am a scalpel. Give me access to your vendor invoices for the last 2 quarters. If I do not find $50,000 in recoverable errors within 2 weeks, you do not owe me a dime. He gave me the access. I worked like a woman possessed. I pored over thousands of line items. I found duplicate billings for sterile equipment. I found service contracts that had auto-renewed at higher rates without authorization. I found claim denials that were purely due to coding errors between the vendor and the hospital system. In 10 days, I found $72,000 in waste. When I presented the report, the room went quiet. I had not just found the money, I had built a roadmap to prevent it from leaving the building again. The CFO closed the folder. "We would like to discuss a retainer," he said. "We have 4 other facilities that need this level of scrutiny." I walked out of that building with a signed contract worth more than my entire previous year's revenue. I sat in my car and screamed. It was a guttural, raw sound of victory. I had taken the weapon that hurt us and turned it into a shield. But the victory brought new dangers. I wanted to say yes to everything. I wanted to work 20 hours a day to build a fortress of cash so high that no tragedy could ever scale it again. Evan stopped me. I was working at the dining room table on a Saturday night, my laptop glowing in the dark. Evan walked in and gently closed the lid. "We are not doing this," he said. I looked up, ready to fight. "We need the money. Evan, we need the security. We need a mother and a wife," he said firmly. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than they used to be, but his gaze was steady. "We are rebuilding. Brooklyn. But we are rebuilding as partners, not martyrs. You cannot burn the candle at both ends and expect the middle to hold. We survived the storm. Do not drown us in the calm." He was right. I was running on trauma response, not strategy. I took a breath. I hired my first employee the next week. Her name was Sarah, a sharp-eyed analyst who had been laid off from a major insurer. When I drafted her offer letter, I paused at the benefits section. Standard practice for small businesses was to offer a stipend or make employees wait 90 days for coverage. It was cheaper. It was safer for cash flow. I thought about the rain. I thought about the bracelet in my mother's hand. I thought about the hospital administrator asking for a deposit while my daughter's cells waited in a lab. I deleted the standard text. I typed a new clause. Full comprehensive health coverage, including family dependents. Effective day 1 of employment. It would cost me 15% more. It would eat into my margins, but I knew exactly what next month could cost. It could cost a life. I signed the offer letter and sent it. My business was no longer just a way to pay bills. It was a philosophy. I was building an empire on the ashes of my desperation, and in my kingdom. No one would ever have to beg for their life in a wet coat. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when a debt is paid in full. It is not the silence of obligation, but the silence of freedom. 6 months after my business stabilized, I invited Wade and Jolene over for Sunday dinner. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn evening where the leaves crunch under your boots and the sky turns a bruised purple. I had cooked a roast, the smell of rosemary and garlic filling the house, but the real nourishment was sitting in a manila envelope on the sideboard. We ate in the dining room. Harlow was there, wearing a dinosaur t-shirt and telling a long, winding story about her new art teacher. She was back in school part-time. 3 mornings a week, watching her eat mashed potatoes with the casual hunger of a healthy child, felt like witnessing a miracle every single time. After the plates were cleared, I brought the envelope to the table. Wade was reaching for his coffee, his hands rough and calloused from 40 years at the plant. I slid the package toward them. "What is this?" Jolene asked, wiping her hands on a napkin. "Open it," I said. Wade put on his reading glasses. He pulled out the papers. The top document was a deed. The second was a portfolio statement from a high-yield retirement trust. We paid back the loan for the treatment 3 months ago. But that was just money. You sold your security for us. You sold your peace of mind. I took a breath. The house on Maple Street. The 1-story ranch with the screened-in porch and the access to the creek. I bought it. It is in your name, free and clear, and the account has enough to replace the surrender value of the life insurance policy, plus interest. Wade went still. He looked at the paper, then at me, then at the paper again. His jaw worked. but no sound came out. "Brooklyn," Jolene whispered, "this is too much. We did not do it for a reward." "I know," I said. "That is exactly why you deserve it. You gave up your future so my daughter could have one. I am just giving it back to you." Wade stood up abruptly and walked to the window. I saw his shoulders shaking. It was the only time I had ever seen him cry. We did not make a speech. We did not hug for the cameras. We just sat there in the quiet warmth of a debt settled with love, while Harlow hummed a song in the next room. That night, I opened a notebook I kept in my bedside drawer. I called it my gratitude ledger. In the front half, I wrote down every act of kindness we had received. The neighbor who mowed our lawn when we were in Atlanta, the barista who gave me free coffee when I looked like a zombie, the nurse who stayed 10 minutes past her shift to braid Harlow's hair. But in the back half of the book, I kept a different kind of list. I started the Harlow Promise Fund 2 weeks later. It was not a gala. There were no black ties or silent auctions with autographed guitars. It was a potluck in the community center basement, lit by fluorescent strips and smelling of floor wax and slow cooker chili. We set up folding chairs. Local businesses donated what they could. The hardware store gave $50. The bakery gave 3 dozen cupcakes. It was modest, gritty, and real. I stood up in front of 30 people and told them the truth. I told them about the gap between insurance approval and a child's life. I told them about the deposit that almost didn't happen. We raised $4,000 that night. It was not millions. But 3 days later, a mother in the next county called me. Her son needed a specialized brace that insurance deemed cosmetic, but his surgeon deemed vital. The cost was $2,000. I wrote the check. I hand-delivered it. I saw the tension leave that mother's shoulders, the same way it had left mine. That was the work. It was not about prestige. It was about filling the cracks that families fell through. Of course, nothing stays quiet in Charleston for long. My parents heard about the fund. I knew they would. They moved in circles where philanthropy was a competitive sport, a way to launder reputation through tax-deductible donations. To them, my folding chair fundraiser was an embarrassment. I began to hear the whispers. They did not come to me directly. They filtered through the grapevine, distorted but recognizable. My mother was telling people at the club that I was unstable. She spun a narrative where I was exploiting Harlow's illness for attention, using family drama to solicit money from strangers. She painted herself as the concerned grandmother. Worried that I was damaging the family name with my public displays of poverty, poor Brooklyn, she reportedly said over mimosas, she just never learned how to manage her affairs quietly. It is so gauche to discuss money, don't you think? I wanted to scream. I wanted to post the wire transfer receipts on every telephone pole in the city. I wanted to drive to her house and scream that while she was discussing decorum. I was saving lives, but I did nothing. I refused to engage. I posted updates about the fund's impact, photos of families we helped, and nothing else. I would not let them drag me into the mud. Then the warning came. I was at the grocery store, staring at the produce, when a woman named Eleanor stopped her cart next to mine. She had been my mother's best friend for 20 years. She was a woman who wore pearls to the gym and knew where every skeleton in Charleston was buried. She pretended to inspect a melon. "Brooklyn," she said, not looking at me. "Hello?" "Eleanor." "You need to be careful," she said, her voice low. "Excuse me?" "Raymond and Celeste are not just talking about your taste levels anymore. They are telling people you are mentally unwell. They are suggesting that your business success is a manic episode and that you might be a liability." I gripped the handle of my cart. "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor turned to look at me. Her eyes were hard, but there was a flicker of something else. Respect? Pity? I could not tell. "Because my grandson has leukemia," she said, "and I saw what you did for that family in Dorchester County last week. Your parents are powerful. Brooklyn, if they decide to paint you as crazy to protect their own image, people will believe them. You need to protect yourself." She pushed her cart away before I could respond. I stood there in the produce aisle, the chill of the refrigeration unit seeping into my skin. It was not just gossip anymore. It was a strategic strike. If they painted me as unstable, it could hurt my business. My clients were hospitals and compliance officers. They relied on my judgment. If the rumor mill decided I was having a breakdown, contracts would pause, revenue would dry up, the Harlow Promise Fund would lose credibility. My parents were willing to burn down my livelihood to hide their own shame. They were preemptively discrediting me so that if the truth about the wedding money ever came out, it would look like the ravings of a bitter, unstable daughter. I drove home in silence. I did not go to the kitchen to cook. I went straight to my home office. I sat down at my desk and opened a new file on my computer. I named it Defense. I started pulling records. I downloaded the bank statements from the week of the engagement party. I found the emails where I had begged for a loan. I found the text messages Grant had sent me. I found the time-stamped logs from the hospital admission. I built a timeline. Monday, 2 p.m. Specialist confirms diagnosis. Monday, 4 p.m. Insurance denial received. Monday, 8 p.m. Arrival at engagement party. Monday, 8:30 p.m. Refusal of funds. Reason given. Wedding expenses. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Grant texts accusing me of seeking attention. I did not act on it yet. I did not send it to the press. I did not post it online. I just compiled it. I turned my pain into data. I turned their cruelty into a searchable database. They thought they were dealing with the old Brooklyn, the one who sought their approval, the one who would stay silent to keep the peace. They did not realize that that woman had died in the rain outside their house. The woman who sat at the desk now was a compliance auditor. I dealt in facts. I dealt in receipts. And if they wanted to question my stability, I would show them exactly how stable, organized, and dangerous I had become. I saved the file and backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. Let them talk. I thought, I have the truth in PDF format, and when the time comes, I will not need to raise my voice. I will just hit print. The phone on my desk buzzed at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. It was Sarah, my analyst. I have Elias Thorne from the American Enterprise Ledger on line 2. She said, he wants to talk about the benefits package and the fund. He says he is doing a piece on the changing landscape of small business healthcare. I hesitated. The American Enterprise Ledger was not a local gossip rag. It was a serious publication read by the kind of people who signed 6-figure contracts and sat on hospital boards. My first instinct was to say no. I had spent the last year building a fortress of privacy around my life. I had separated my professional reputation from my personal history with the precision of a surgeon. But then I looked at the photo of Harlow on my desk. She was smiling, her hair finally long enough to tuck behind her ears. I thought about the mother in Dorchester County who had cried when I handed her the check for her son's brace. I picked up the phone. This is Brooklyn. I said, Mr. Thorne was direct. He did not want a fluff piece. He wanted to know why a boutique risk compliance firm with 3 employees offered a benefits package that rivaled a Fortune 500 company. He wanted to know why I was funneling 10% of my net profits into a fund for medical deposits. I told him the truth. I did not name names. I did not mention the engagement party or the specific geography of my parents' house, but I told him the timeline. I told him about standing in a room with people who claimed to love me while they explained that a wedding venue deposit was non-refundable, and my daughter's life was an unfortunate lack of planning. I told him that the difference between life and death in the American healthcare system is often a wire transfer that arrives 2 hours too late. The article ran 3 days later. The headline was not sensational. It was stark. When a wedding costs more than a life. One CEO's fight for healthcare equity. I read it on my tablet with a knot in my stomach. Thorne had verified every fact. He contrasted the average cost of a luxury wedding in the Southeast, $250,000, with the cost of the manufacturing deposit that saved Harlow, $95,000. He laid out the math of cruelty without using a single emotional adjective. The reaction was immediate, by noon. My inbox was flooded, but it was not hate mail. It was a tidal wave of solidarity. Parents from across the country were sharing the article. Sponsors from medical device companies were reaching out to partner with the Harlow Promise Fund. Donations started pouring in. $50, $100, $5,000 from an anonymous donor in Seattle. The fund's balance tripled in 4 hours. It was not viral because it was dramatic. It was viral because it was true. Every parent reading it knew exactly how thin the line was between stability and ruin. Then the other phone started ringing. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later, in the privacy of my car. It was Raymond, my father. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice he used when he was negotiating a hostile takeover. You have crossed a line. Brooklyn, we are receiving calls. People are connecting the dots. You did not name us. But you made the timeline specific enough that our circle knows exactly who you are talking about. You are destroying the family name for 5 minutes of fame. You are ungrateful and you are vindictive. Fix this. Retract it. Or you will see what actual pressure looks like. He did not ask about Harlow. He did not ask why his daughter felt the need to start a fund to save other children. He only cared that his friends at the country club might look at him differently. I deleted the message. I did not block him. I wanted the record. 20 minutes later, Grant called. I answered this time, mostly because I wanted to hear the panic. You selfish witch, he screamed. The speakerphone quality was tinny, but his rage was high definition. Do you have any idea what you have done? My partners are reading this. They are asking if I am the brother who chose a honeymoon over a dying niece. You are the brother who chose a honeymoon over a dying niece. I said calmly, if the facts make you look bad, Grant, maybe you should have behaved better. This is slander. It is not slander if it is true. I have the receipts. Grant, I have the texts. I have the hospital logs. Do not threaten me with legal action unless you want full discovery. I heard a rustling sound in the background. A woman's voice, soft and hesitant. Grant, is that true? Did she really ask you for the money before we paid the caterers? Shut up. Sloan, Grant snapped. Go wait in the car. I hung up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally saying it out loud. I had spent my whole life protecting them, absorbing their toxicity so they could shine. I was done being the sponge. That evening, I was closing up the office when my personal cell buzzed. It was a text from a number I did not have saved, but I recognized the area code. I opened it. I did not know. I swear to you. Brooklyn. I did not know she asked before the deadline. He told me you asked for money for a vacation. I feel sick. What else have they lied about? It was Sloan. I stared at the screen. Sloan, the perfect fiancé. Sloan, who I had assumed was just as shallow as my brother. I realized then that she was just another prop in their theater. They had lied to her too. They had turned me into a villain to justify their own greed. I did not reply. I did not know if I could trust her yet. I packed up my laptop and prepared to leave. I was logging out of my email when a notification popped up. New message. Sender. Unknown. Subject. Wedding payments. Source. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hovered the mouse over the subject line. It could be spam. It could be a virus. But my gut told me it was neither. I opened the email. There was no body text. Just a single PDF attachment. I clicked it. The document opened. It was a series of bank transfer records. They were redacted in places. Black bars covering account numbers. But the entity names were visible. I saw the date. The morning of the engagement party. I saw the amount. $250,000. I saw the recipient. The Venetia Grand Hotel Event Planning Group. But then I looked at the sender. I expected to see my father's personal brokerage account. I expected to see the family trust. I saw neither. The funds had been wired from an account labeled HCL, Client Escrow/Reserve B. HCL stood for Harrison Crest Lending, my parents' firm, Client Escrow. My breath hitched. Escrow funds are sacred. They are client money. They are restricted. Using client escrow funds for personal expenses is not just unethical. It is not just a violation of fiduciary duty. It is embezzlement. I scrolled down. There were other transfers, 50,000 to a florist, 20,000 to a travel concierge, all from accounts that looked like operational business reserves or client holdings. They had not just refused to save my daughter because they wanted a party. They had refused to save her because the money they were spending on the party was not even theirs to spend. They were frantic to get the wedding paid for to keep up appearances, perhaps using money they planned to replace before an audit. If I had asked for a check that night, it would have created a paper trail they could not explain. They needed the money to go to vendors, to disappear into the fog of event costs, not to a hospital that would issue a clear, auditable receipt. I felt sick. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a crime. I looked at the screen. Who sent this? Was it a disgruntled employee at their firm? Was it someone who read the article and decided to dig? It did not matter. I had the smoking gun. My father had accused me of destroying the family name. I looked at the PDF again. He had destroyed it himself. I was just the one holding the flashlight. I saved the file to an encrypted drive. I printed a hard copy and locked it in the safe. Then I sat in the dark office and listened to the hum of the server. The game had changed. I was not just fighting for an apology anymore. I was holding the evidence of a felony, and for the first time in years, I held all the cards. I sat in the office of David Sterling, a forensic accountant, an old law school friend who owed me a favor. The blinds were drawn. On his desk lay the printout of the anonymous PDF I had received. David had been staring at it for 10 minutes without speaking. "This is not just creative accounting," David said finally, taking off his glasses. "This is a roadmap to prison." He pointed to the line item for the $250,000 sent to the wedding venue. "See this routing number? It originates from a segregated client trust account in South Carolina. You cannot touch that money for operational expenses. You certainly cannot use it to pay for a destination wedding." I felt the blood drain from my face. "So it is theft. It is commingling at best and grand larceny at worst," David replied. "Look at the memo line. They labeled a transfer to a luxury florist as consulting retainer. They labeled the venue deposit as site development fee. They are disguising personal expenditures as business costs to hide the fact that they are dipping into client reserves." I left David's office with a heavy feeling in my gut. My parents were not just cruel. They were criminals. They had stood in their library, sipping scotch, telling me they had no liquidity, while they were actively draining their clients' life savings to throw a party. I decided to give them one last chance to confess, not to the police, but to me. I opened my laptop and typed a single email to my father. Subject: the wedding funds. Dad, I have seen the transfer logs. I know the money did not come from your personal savings. Tell me the truth about where that $250,000 came from, if there is an explanation. Give it to me now. I waited 24 hours. I checked my inbox every 10 minutes. There was no reply. The silence was an answer in itself. It was the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. 2 days later, the bubble burst. The article in the American Enterprise Ledger had done more than raise money for my fund. It had raised eyebrows at the State Board of Financial Institutions. Apparently, several of my parents' investors had read the piece and started asking questions about the liquidity of Harrison Crest Lending. When they did not get satisfactory answers, they filed complaints. I was at my desk when a process server walked in. He did not look like the ones in the movies. He looked like a bored mailman. He handed me a thick envelope. "Brooklyn Harrison?" "Yes, you are served." It was a subpoena. The state regulator had opened a formal inquiry into Harrison Crest Lending. They were demanding all communications, contracts, and work products related to a compliance audit I had performed for the firm 4 years ago. I had almost forgotten about it. When I first started my consulting business, my father had thrown me a bone, a small project to update their employee handbook and internal data privacy policies. It was busy work, meant to make me feel included while keeping me at arm's length. I drove to my storage unit that night. I dug through boxes of old hard drives until I found the backup from that year. I plugged it into my laptop, the fan whirring loudly in the quiet room. I started searching for keywords: escrow, reserve, transfer. Most of it was mundane: policy drafts, meeting notes. But then I found a folder of archived emails that had been auto-saved during the project. I opened a thread dated 2 months before my brother's engagement. The subject line was cash flow/gap funding. It was an email from my father to their internal accountant. Raymond, we are short on the liquidity for the chaotic quarter. Move the $200,000 from Client Reserve B to the operating account. We have to secure the deposits for the Italy event or Grant will lose the date. We will move it back before anyone notices. Just code it as a temporary hold. I stared at the screen. We will move it back before anyone notices. The date of the email was 3 years ago. They had been doing this for years. They treated their clients' money like a personal piggy bank, robbing Peter to pay for Paul's wedding, banking on the fact that they could always hustle enough new money to cover the hole before the auditors arrived. But the hole had gotten too big. And when I had come to them in the rain, begging for $95,000 to save Harlow, they were already leveraged to the hilt. They didn't refuse me just because they were selfish. They refused me because if they had tried to pull another $100,000 out of that escrow account, the whole house of cards might have collapsed. They chose to protect their fraud over my daughter's life. I sat back in my chair. I felt a cold, hard clarity. I picked up the external hard drive. I did not hesitate. I did not think about family loyalty. Family loyalty ends when you let a child die to cover up a felony. I packaged the emails, the policy drafts, and the timeline I had built. I called the number on the subpoena. This is Brooklyn Harrison. I said to the investigator who answered, I have the documents you requested, and I have additional context that you are going to want to see. I handed it all over. I gave them the map to the bodies. I did it for the strangers whose retirement funds were being spent on imported orchids. I did it because silence is complicit. That evening, I received a text from Sloan. Meet me. Please, the park by the river. 10 p.m. I went. I parked my car under a street lamp and waited. Sloan arrived 5 minutes later. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses. Even though it was dark, she looked like a ghost. She got into my passenger seat. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. He told me. She whispered, Grant? She nodded. Tears streamed down her face. He was drunk. We were fighting about the article. He laughed. Brooklyn? He actually laughed. He said you were stupid for begging for scraps. He said, why use your own money when the business can pay for the pleasure? She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. He bragged that the wedding was paid for with float. That is what he called it, the float. He said it was a victimless crime because they always put it back. It is not victimless. Sloan, I said softly, and they do not always put it back. I know. She sobbed. I saw a letter on his desk today. From the bank. They are freezing accounts. Brooklyn, I did not know. I swear to God, I thought they were just rich. I didn't know they were thieves. I believe you. I said, and I did. Sloan was vanity personified, but she was not a criminal. She was just another person my family had dazzled with fake gold. I can't marry him, she said, her voice breaking. I can't marry into this. I am terrified. Brooklyn, if the feds get involved, they are already involved. I said, the state regulators have everything. Sloan let out a strangled sound. She reached for the door handle. I have to go. I have to pack. I am leaving tonight. Go, I said. Get out before the walls come down. She scrambled out of the car and ran into the darkness. I watched her go. Then I started my engine. I drove home to my husband and my daughter. The storm was coming, a hurricane of indictments and seized assets and public ruin. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the rain. I had built a shelter that was waterproof, funded by honest work and truth. My parents had built a castle out of paper, and I had just lit the match. The collapse of Harrison Crest Lending did not happen with a bang. It happened with the quiet, terrifying click of a server lock. On a Thursday morning, 3 days after I handed over the documents to the state regulator, the firm's operating accounts were frozen. It was not a warning shot. It was a siege. I heard about it not from my father, but from the industry newswire I subscribed to for my own business. The headline was dry and devastating. State regulator suspends operations at Harrison Crest Lending pending audit of client trust accounts. Gravity is not vindictive, it just pulls things down when the support is removed. And my parents had removed their own support years ago when they started treating other people's life savings like a personal line of credit. The fallout was immediate. Corporate partners who had used the firm for bridge financing paused their contracts within hours. The trust that takes decades to build evaporated in the span of a single morning. I imagined the phones ringing in their marble-floored office, lines lighting up with panicked investors asking where their money was, and nobody picking up because their lawyers had told them to shut up. Grant was the first to crack. He had been up for a promotion at his architectural firm, a role that relied heavily on his social connections and the prestige of the Harrison name. When the news broke, the promotion vanished. He did not take it well. He went on social media, posting a vague, angry diatribe about loyalty and betrayal. Thinly veiling his accusations against me, he called me a bitter failure who was jealous of his success. But the internet is not a courtroom, and likes do not pay legal fees. 2 days later, investigators showed up at his office. They did not want to hear about his feelings. They wanted to see the invoices for the wedding planner, the florist, and the travel concierge. They wanted to know why his signature was on contracts paid for by a lending firm's escrow account. Grant stopped posting. The reality of a felony charge has a way of silencing even the loudest narcissist. Sloan did not post anything. She did not issue a statement. She simply erased the wedding date from her bio. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had moved out of the condo she shared with Grant while he was at work. She left the engagement ring on the counter along with a note that reportedly said she refused to marry into a lie. She postponed the wedding indefinitely. But everyone knew what that meant. It was over. The $250,000 my parents had stolen to buy her loyalty had only purchased a temporary lease on a facade. My parents began to run, not physically. They could not leave the state, but financially. They tried to outrun the tide. I saw the listing for the lake house first. Then the vintage Jaguar my father had restored for shows appeared on an auction site. They were liquidating. They were stripping the paint off their golden life to find the copper wiring underneath, desperate to sell anything that wasn't nailed down. They were trying to fill the hole in the escrow account before the forensic accountants finished their final tally. It was a fire sale of a legacy. I did not gloat. I did not drive by their house to watch the movers take the paintings off the walls. I did not feel a surge of triumph. I mostly felt exhausted. I was too busy building something real to watch them dismantle something fake. My business was expanding. We had picked up 3 new hospital systems in the tri-state area. I was hiring 2 more compliance officers. The Harlow Promise Fund had funded 12 surgeries in 2 months. I was spending my days reviewing grant applications from families who were standing on the same precipice I had stood on, writing those checks, signing my name to a promise that a child would get treatment. Felt better than any revenge ever could. The only time I cried was at a middle school auditorium on a Tuesday night. Harlow had been cleared to join her class for the spring recital. She was still thin, and her hair was a pixie cut growing out from the chemo. But she was there. She stood on the risers in the second row, wearing a white shirt and a red skirt, singing a song about sunshine. I sat in the dark between Evan and Jolene. I watched my daughter open her mouth and sing. I watched her chest rise and fall. Breath that we had bought. Breath that we had fought for. If I had accepted my parents' refusal, if I had let their definition of impossible become my reality, that spot on the risers would be empty. The tears ran down my face, hot and fast. Evan squeezed my hand so hard his knuckles cracked. We didn't say anything. We just watched her sing. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. After the recital, we went for ice cream. Harlow had chocolate smudged on her chin. Laughing at something Wade said, Jolene pulled me aside while the others were ordering. "You know," she said, leaning against the counter, "I have been thinking." "About what?" I asked, wiping my eyes. About how angry you were that they didn't help you. I stiffened. I am still angry. Jolene, they almost killed her. I know, she said softly. And they will answer for that. But Brooklyn, listen to me. If they had written that check, if they had saved the day with their dirty money, you would still be under their thumb. You would be grateful to them. You would have stayed small just to stay acceptable to them. You would never have built your company. You would never have started the fund. You would just be the daughter they rescued. I looked at her. The neon sign of the ice cream shop buzzed overhead. She was right. Their cruelty had been the fire that forged me. If they had been kind, I would still be a consultant begging for their approval, because they were monsters. I had been forced to become a warrior. I looked at Harlow, alive and laughing. I looked at the business alerts on my phone, evidence of a career built on my own competence. I would not thank them, but I would acknowledge the gravity of what their rejection had created. The next morning, the legal notice arrived at my office. It was not a subpoena this time. It was a copy of a restitution demand sent to my parents' legal team, which had been forwarded to me because my name appeared on the discovery list as a cooperating witness. The state was offering a plea deal framework, but it came with a hard condition. The deficit in the client trust account was exactly $180,000. The rest had been recovered through the liquidation of assets, but they were short. The demand was clear. Restitution must be paid in full within 7 days. If the money was not returned to the victims by the deadline, the state would move forward with criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud in the first degree. Mandatory minimum sentencing would apply. $180,000. It was a fortune to most people, to my parents, in their prime. It was a bad weekend in Vegas. Now, it was the price of their freedom. I looked at the date on the document. They had 5 days left. They had sold the cars. They had sold the art. They had leveraged the house. And they were still short. I knew what was coming. I felt it in my bones. They were out of options. They were out of friends. The country club set had abandoned them the moment the accounts were frozen. Grant was broke and humiliated. There was only one person left in their orbit who had liquidity. There was only one person who had access to capital and a reason to care, however complicated that care might be. The phone on my desk remained silent. But the silence felt heavy, charged with the static of a storm about to break. They would come. Gravity pulls everything to the center, and I was the only solid ground left standing. I put the document in my drawer and went back to work. I had a business to run, and if they wanted to come knocking on my door, they would find that the locks had been changed. The Tuesday of Harlow's 9th birthday week began with a deceptive sense of calm. I was sitting in my corner office, reviewing the final compliance audits for a new hospital network in Tennessee. My desk was a sprawling surface of glass and reclaimed wood, a stark contrast to the kitchen table where I had once wept over utility bills. The view behind me stretched over the Charleston skyline, a vista of steeples and cranes that I had earned piece by piece. My assistant, Sarah, buzzed the intercom at 10 in the morning. Her voice was usually crisp and professional, but today it carried a tremor of hesitation. "Brooklyn," she said, "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison are here. They say it is urgent." I froze. My hand hovered over the tablet I was holding. It had been 3 years since I had stood in their library dripping wet. It had been months since the state regulators froze their accounts. I had not seen them face to face since the night I walked out of their engagement party. My body remembered them before my brain did. A cold shiver raced down my spine. The phantom sensation of rain soaking through a trench coat. My stomach tightened. A reflexive defense mechanism honed by decades of seeking their approval and receiving only judgment. "Send them in," I said. I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. I wanted to be standing when they entered. I wanted to be the tallest thing in the room. The heavy glass door opened. Raymond and Celeste Harrison walked in. The first thing I noticed was how small they looked. In my memory, my father was a giant, a man who filled rooms with his voice and his ego. Now, he looked like an old man in a suit that hung too loosely on his frame. His shoulders were slumped, My mother, once the terrifying curator of Charleston's social scene, looked brittle. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, but her eyes were darting around the room, scanning the awards on the shelves, the expensive art, the view. They were looking at success they did not build. They were looking at a kingdom that had risen from the ashes they had tried to scatter. "Brooklyn," my mother said. Her voice was breathless, pitched an octave too high. "This office, it is absolutely stunning. We heard about the expansion in the business journal, but seeing it, she reached out as if to hug me, then stopped when she saw the look on my face. She let her hand drop to her side. "We are so proud of you." She finished weakly. "The philanthropy, the Harlow Promise Fund, it is remarkable work." I did not smile. I did not offer them a seat. I gestured to the 2 chairs across from my desk, keeping the wide expanse of wood between us. "Why are you here?" I asked. My father cleared his throat. He sat down, gripping the arms of the chair. He looked tired. The arrogance that had fueled him for 40 years was gone, replaced by a desperate, hungry fear. "We are in a difficult position." "Brooklyn," he said, "the investigation, the asset freeze, it has been a nightmare." I said nothing. I just waited. "We have liquidated everything," he continued, his voice tight. "The lake house, the cars, even the jewelry. We have satisfied the majority of the client restitution demands." "But," I prompted. "But we are short," he said. "The final audit revealed a deficit we did not anticipate. The state has given us a deadline. We need to deposit the remaining balance into the Victim Restitution Fund by 5 o'clock today." I looked at the digital clock on my wall. It was 10:30 in the morning. "How much?" I asked. My father looked at the floor. $180,000. The number hung in the air. $180,000. It was almost exactly double what I had asked for to save Harlow's life. "And if you do not pay it?" He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Then the district attorney moves forward with criminal charges, grand larceny, embezzlement, mandatory minimum sentencing. We will be arrested tonight." I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, bitter and sharp as broken glass. The irony was so precise it felt scripted. 3 years ago, I had walked into their home with a deadline and a desperate need for a deposit. I had to save a life. Now, they were sitting in my office with 6 hours to save their freedom. The universe has a twisted sense of humor, does it not? I asked softly. My mother leaned forward. Her eyes were wet. "Brooklyn, please, we know we have had our differences, but we are your parents. You cannot let us go to prison. You have the liquidity. We know you do. This company is generating millions. It is," I agreed, "because I run it with integrity." Celeste let out a sob. "We made mistakes. We know that. But if we had known back then, if we had known how serious it was with Harlow, we would have done things differently. You have to believe that. We thought you were just being dramatic about the insurance. We didn't know it was life or death." I stared at her. She was trying to rewrite history. She was trying to smooth over the jagged edges of their cruelty with a revisionist paint job. She wanted to believe that their refusal was a misunderstanding, not a choice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Stop," I said. I tapped the screen. I scrolled back through my saved files to a folder labeled Evidence. I had never told them I recorded our conversation that night in the library. I had turned on the voice memo app the moment I stepped out of the rain, an instinct born from years of having my words twisted against me. I needed a record of what I asked for, in case I needed to show the doctors I had tried. I pressed play. The sound of the library filled my sleek, modern office. The audio was crisp. Harlow relapsed. The cancer is aggressive. I need it by tomorrow afternoon. My own voice, sounding young and terrified. Then my father's voice, booming and dismissive. Liquidation triggers tax events. It disrupts the portfolio. Then the clincher, the line that had haunted me for 1,000 nights. "We have just finalized the contracts for Grant's wedding. $250,000 is non-refundable." And finally, my mother's voice, cold as ice. "You should have planned better. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. Raymond's face had drained of all color. He looked like a wax figure melting under heat. Celeste had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. They were hearing their own monstrosity played back to them. There was no misunderstanding. There was no confusion. They had chosen a party over a child, and they had done it with the calm calculation of bankers discussing a bad investment. "You knew," I said, my voice steady. "You knew exactly what was at stake. You just didn't care." "Brooklyn," my father whispered. He sounded broken. I opened the drawer of my desk. I pulled out a blue folder. Inside was a legal document I had prepared with David Sterling 3 days ago. The moment I saw the restitution demand hit the public docket, I knew this moment would come. I knew they would come to the only door left open. I slid the folder across the glass. "I will not give you a check," I said. "I will not hand you $180,000 to save your reputation. That money belongs to the victims you stole from, and I will ensure they get it." My father reached for the folder, his hands shaking. "What is this?" "It is a settlement framework," I said. "The Harlow Promise Fund will cover your remaining restitution deficit directly to the state. We will pay the victims today, before the deadline. You will not go to prison." My mother let out a breath, sagging with relief. "Oh, thank God. Thank you. Brooklyn, I knew you would not abandon us." I held up a hand. "I am not finished. This is not a gift. It is a purchase." I pointed to the document. "In exchange for the payment, you will sign that agreement. It stipulates 3 things. 1. You will permanently surrender all remaining equity in Harrison Crest Lending and dissolve the firm. 2. You will issue a public admission of guilt, drafted by my legal team, acknowledging that you misappropriated client funds to pay for personal family events." I paused. They were staring at me, stunned. "And 3, I said, leaning forward, "you will sign a formal termination of parental rights. You will agree to a permanent restraining order preventing you from ever contacting me, Evan, or Harlow again. You will write a letter to Harlow, to be given to her when she is 18, admitting exactly why you almost let her die." My father looked at the paper. "This is blackmail." "No, Dad," I said, "this is gravity." He looked at the clock. It was 11. The deadline was marching toward them. "You have a choice," I said. "You can leave this office with your pride and go to prison for 10 years. Or you can sign the paper, save your freedom, and lose the daughter you never wanted anyway." I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I did not look at them. I was done looking at them. "You want me to be your only hope?" I asked, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. "Then you will sign what you refuse to sign for my daughter. Truth." I watched my parents stare at the document on the desk. They were looking for a loophole. They were looking for the clause where I handed them a check made out to cash, so they could quietly pay off the restitution order and pretend none of this ever happened. They were looking for a way to save their public image while I quietly cleaned up their mess in the background. "There is no check," I said, breaking the silence. My father looked up, his brow furrowed. "You said you would pay it. You said the fund would cover the deficit. The fund will pay the victims." I corrected him, directly. "My legal team has prepared a list of the clients whose escrow accounts were raided. We will issue wire transfers to them individually. The memo line on every single transfer will read, 'Restitution from the Harlow Promise Fund on behalf of Raymond and Celeste Harrison.'" My mother gasped. Her hand flew to her throat. "Brooklyn, you cannot do that. That is public humiliation. Everyone will know. Everyone already knows." "Mom," I leaned back in my chair. "The state regulators know. The board knows. The only people who do not know are the ones you stole from. This ensures they get their money back, and it ensures that you cannot spin this as a generous family loan. It is not generosity, it is a bailout. And bailouts come with terms." I pointed to the signature line on the last page. "You will sign that admission of misconduct. You will surrender your remaining licenses, and you will cooperate fully with the fraud investigation. No more hiding assets. No more lies." Celeste stood up, She walked around the side of the desk. Ignoring the boundary I had set, she reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling. "Brooklyn, please, look at me. I am your mother. I carried you. I raised you. You cannot let us be destroyed like this. We made a mistake. But we are family. Love is about forgiveness, is it not?" I looked at her hand on mine. It was the same hand that had held the crystal glass of champagne while she told me I should have planned better for my daughter's cancer. I pulled my hand away. "Love is not an emergency lever you pull when you are losing," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "You did not act like a mother when I was standing in the rain. You did not act like a mother when Harlow was hooked up to a machine. You are only acting like a mother now because you need a banker." She flinched as if I had slapped her. She stepped back, her face crumbling. "I am not finished," I added. "There is one more condition." I flipped to the second page of the agreement. "You will write a letter to Harlow. It will be handwritten. It will be age-appropriate. But it will be truthful. You will explain that you are not in her life because you chose money over her health. You will not make excuses. You will not blame the market or your stress levels. You will own it, and you will acknowledge that when she turns 18, she can choose whether or not she ever wants to speak to you again. Until then, you have zero contact." Raymond slammed his hand on the desk. The sound echoed off the glass walls. "This is insane. You would let your own parents be destroyed? You would humiliate us in front of a child? We are your flesh and blood." I looked him dead in the eye. "You tried to let my daughter die for a party. Dad." The sentence hung in the air. It was the absolute, unvarnished truth. It stripped away the pretense of cash flow issues and misunderstandings. They had weighed a wedding against a life, and they had chosen the wedding. He opened his mouth to argue, to bluster, to find some way to make himself the victim. The office door opened. My attorney, David Sterling, walked in, but he was not alone. Walking beside him, looking pale but determined, was Sloane. My brother's fiancée, or ex-fiancée, was holding a stack of file folders. She wore a simple gray suit, not the designer dresses she used to wear to impress my mother. She looked at me, gave a small nod, and then turned to face my parents. "Sloane?" my mother whispered. "What are you doing here?" "I am here to authenticate the vendor invoices," Sloane said. Her voice shook slightly, but she steadied it. "I gave Mr. Sterling the emails Grant sent me, the ones where he bragged about the wedding being paid for with the client float." "Grant told you that in confidence," Raymond roared, turning purple. "He told me that while he was laughing about your daughter begging for help," Sloane replied. She placed the files on the desk next to the settlement agreement. "I am not marrying into a crime family, Raymond, and I am not going to let you lie your way out of this. I saw the receipts. I saw the transfers. It is all here." The air left the room. My father looked at the files. He looked at Sloane, the woman they had spent $250,000 of stolen money to impress. He looked at me, the daughter they had discarded who was now the only thing standing between them and a prison cell. The fight went out of him. His shoulders collapsed. He looked suddenly ancient. He realized then that I was not punishing him. I was not being vindictive. I was simply ending the cycle. I was stopping the spinning wheel of lies that had sustained our family image for decades. "Give me the pen," he croaked. "Raymond," Celeste shrieked. "You cannot sign that." He did not look at her. He took the heavy fountain pen from the desk. His hand was shaking so badly the tip scratched against the paper. "It is over. Celeste," he muttered. He signed his name, Raymond Arthur Harrison. He pushed the paper toward her. "Sign it, or go to jail." My mother looked at the paper. She looked at the view of the city she used to rule. She looked at me one last time. "Brooklyn," she whispered. It sounded like a spell she had forgotten how to cast. She was looking for the little girl who used to desperation for her approval. That girl was gone. "Sign it. Mom." She picked up the pen. She wept as she wrote. It was a messy, jagged signature, nothing like the elegant script she used on thank-you notes. I took the folder, I checked the signatures. I checked the date. I closed the file. David, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Harrison out. I said, ensure the wire transfers are initiated immediately. I want the victims paid by 2 o'clock. My parents stood up. They did not say goodbye. They walked out of the office like ghosts, fading into a future where they would have to live with exactly who they were. I sat alone in the silence. I felt light. I expected to feel sad. I expected to feel guilty. But all I felt was the clean, cool sensation of a storm passing. I had protected the victims. I had funded the restitution. And I had protected my daughter. I had refused to sell my dignity to buy their love. 5 minutes later, the door creaked open again. I looked up, expecting David. Instead, a small tornado in a sequined skirt ran into the room. "Mommy!" Harlow sprinted across the rug. She was holding a piece of construction paper that was wet with glue and glitter. Behind her, Evan walked in, smiling. Wade and Jolene were right behind him. Wade was holding his baseball cap in his hands, looking uncomfortable in the fancy office. But he was grinning. Jolene was carrying a Tupperware container that I knew contained cookies. "Look what I made," Harlow shouted, slamming the paper onto my desk. Right on top of the spot where the settlement agreement had been, I looked down. It was a crayon drawing. The son in the corner was enormous and wearing sunglasses. Underneath, 5 stick figures stood holding hands. One had long hair. Me. One was tall. Evan. One was small. Harlow. And next to us, a man with a fishing rod and a woman with an apron. Wade and Jolene. "Is this family?" Harlow asked, pointing to the figures with a sticky finger. I looked at the drawing. There were no chandeliers. There were no engagement parties. There was no money. There were just people standing together under a big, bright sun. I looked at Evan, who had sold his bike. I looked at Wade, who had sold his boat. I looked at Jolene, who had sold her security. And I looked at my daughter, who was alive because they had decided she was worth it. I pulled Harlow into my lap and kissed the top of her head. "Yes, baby," I said, my voice thick with tears I was finally happy to shed. Family is who shows up. The final revenge was not the money I took from my parents or the confession I forced them to sign. The final revenge was this. It was the peace they could not touch. It was the love they could not buy. It was the joy of a life built on truth, and that was a fortune they would never possess. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Brooklyn's decision and whether you think she did the right thing. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that like button so this story can reach even more people.